Yes, Pretzelman 945 here. Welcome back to another video. Um, I I know the recordings have been a bit sparse lately. I've been feeling a bit I've been feeling like the need to wait to update certain lists until I finish Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which will definitely get its own video. But for now, I do have an updated list for this video. Um, that is an update to my top 20 villains list. Um, uh, the last one I made, I think it was not a bad list, but I don't know. There's certain villains that I have changed my opinions on a bit. There's certain characters on here that aren't on here that were on the last list. I completely removed them. Um, and yeah, I suspect this will probably be a very very long video. I didn't rewatch the old video, so I don't really remember what I said about certain ones. Or if I even like went into as much detail on those. Um, but yeah, so let's get started with number 20, which is Vecna. Now Vecna was on my previous list. I do think that Vecna does have something to say for the season 5 material, but clearly his strongest showing is in season 4 of the show. Um what I really like about Vecna's role in the story of Stranger Things is that he sort of serves as this very satisfying, I guess, conclusion point for a certain point in the show. Like, obviously, not the overall conclusion as a whole, but like, I guess not conclusion, a closure point in that it feels satisfying to finally, I guess, put a face to the name type thing, where you finally see a physical being, a physical villain that is behind all of this stuff, and like it explains all the lore from the previous season, and that's why season 4 is my favorite season of Stranger Things. Um, Even though I really like season 5, um, I just don't think that Vecna was as strong in that season, which is honestly probably why he moved down a few spots for me. Um, so yeah, that's Vecna. And number 19 is Davy Jones. Now, I'll be honest, it's been a while since I rewatched the Pirates of the Caribbean movies that he's in, but I always I always really really liked Davy Jones. I thought that he was just a very very well done like tragic character. Um and I don't know, just the fact that he was this simple sea monster and yet had so as much depth as a villain as he did, I just found that profoundly interesting. Um, and number 18 is Silco, from Arcane. Um, this is the main flaw that I think my previous list was missing is the fact that I did not include Silco in the list. Um, Silco is such a good villain because he really is not that complicated of a character, and that's what makes him great. Um, like he's essentially just like he's obviously not a good dude, but he's just a simple guy that has a place that he cares about that he wants to try and help if he can. And he ends up, becoming this father figure to Jinx in a way that they both give something to each other that they need. And what makes Silco so captivating to me is the way that he is this. more reluctant kind of villain, and the way that like I find villains really interesting that are like villains, but not but only because they sort of need to be. Like sometimes what I think makes a good villain, not all the time, because that's not exactly the case with most of the villains on this list, the way that Silco is. But sometimes I think what makes an interesting villain is that um the circumstances of a story put them in a position where they have to be a villain, even if it's not something that they expressly desire um or feel like is their place. And I think that Silco is a great example of that. Another example of that, which I do think is slightly different, um, is Bondrewd from Maiden Abyss. And Bondrewd is so evil. Like Bondrewd is so evil that it's fucking comical. Um like he is just one of the shittiest dad characters of all time. And what I think that Bondrewd, like similar to how Silco is sort of a reflection of the world of Arcane, I think that what makes Bondrewd a great villain is the fact that he is one of the reflections of the world of Main Abyss. Because, and sort of like the nature of explorers, especially one like him, who gets so down into the abyss that like they just straight up lose any sense of humanity if they ever even possessed it to begin with. And that to me is what makes the this sheer pure evilness of Bondrewd so captivating is the way that it like meshes and interacts with the world of Maiden Abyss. Um, at number 16, and my let's see, is he my second favorite? No, my third favorite anime villain of all time is Makishima from Psycho Pass. Makishima is the thing that make Psycho Pass season one as good as it is. Psycho Pass and its mystery and the world building around it was very good in its own right, but it is innumerably strengthened by the presence of Makishima in the story. Makishima is such a brilliant, like, fucking troll. Like he is a troll. And yet like this idea of him existing outside the bounds of the dominators and how the society in Psychopaths is supposed to work. What made Psychopath season one of the greatest anime seasons ever made is that Makishima is this perfect story element that blends in to the world building by showing its flaws because he is this unique monster who just like doesn't fit in. And that concept, that idea of contrast is what made Psychopath so compelling. And the reason that, at least in my opinion, but I feel like also many other people's, the reason that Psychopaths fell off so hard is because it's like they used all their good shit too early. Like Makishima was too good of a villain that they used up all the good villain juice and they didn't have nearly enough in season two or what I watched of season 3 before I dropped it, um, to make him to like replace the fascinating yet crucial presence he had in the story and world of Psychopaths. And so that aspect of Makishima and the way that he fits into the world so well is what makes him an amazing villain. Um, at number 15, brand new inclusion on the list, but like the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, he needs to be included. I'm honestly surprised that I didn't include this character in the last list I made. Number 15, we have Luis Guillaburn from Metaphor Refantasio. Um, this guy is one of the best video game villains I've ever seen. You will see the other two on this list later on. Um, what makes Luis a great villain is the fact that he is this character that is so blatantly the antagonist. Like, so clearly the bad guy. Like, it's so obvious. He's so flamboyantly charismatic and, like, made to appear deceptive that, like, it's so obvious. There's, like, zero subtlety at all with his character that he is the bad guy. And that's what makes it great. Um, I think it's normally pretty hard to pull off a villain with like absolutely zero subtlety, but Luis is an example that works because he is just so blatantly evil and so blatantly the bad guy that you're rooting against and trying to defeat. And yet, I said that he has no subtlety, but that's only toward the beginning of the story. Because by the end, you reveal that he is actually an Elden, I believe is the name of the race. I could be getting that wrong. A, it's been like over a year since I played Metaphor last. Uh, which is just like an insane plot twist, and yet it like somehow perfectly connects with the plot and reinforces all of his motivations and actions throughout the entire game. And what I love about Luis is just this honestly incredible combination of blatant zero subtlety at all for like 70% of the story, actually more like 85% really. And then like the last 15% they just masterfully weld in a subtle plot twist which reinforces so many things about his character. It's brilliant. Um and number 14, and my second favorite video game villain, the number one spot is a lot higher on this list. Uh, Number 14 is Sephiroth. Um, Sephiroth is, um, how do I explain Sephiroth? Sephiroth is a character that is utilized so well by him not being there. Now, compared to Luis, like he's like the polar opposite, um, whereas Luis is so blatantly the obvious bad guy of Metaphor. In Final Fantasy VII, Sephiroth is like so subtly the is like so subtly the bad guy, and yet it's like really obvious bits are mixed in there because of the way that he's talked about, and it leads to a ton of buildup. And it makes it so that every time Sephiroth appears, it means that um his it means that his presence is worth the buildup that all the talk around him not actually being there means. And the way that he affects Cloud fundamentally as a character, like their dynamic is just so good. Um, and that's a big part of the reason why I do love Sephiroth as a villain is because their dynamic is fantastic. But also this idea that Sephiroth is this character that just goes completely insane from finding out what happened to about who he thinks his mother is and being this former top hero of Shinra, and all these elements just contribute to his reputation and build him up to be this fascinating character, and he lives up to the hype, and it's just done fantastically. Um, Number 13 is John Kreese, um, from Karate Kid, but primarily I'm talking about Cobra Kai when I'm referring to John Kreese here. Um, Kreese is just Kreese is a broken man. And that's what makes his character so fundamentally interesting. Is that he is such a broken man to the point where he does such evil stuff. Like he's just straight up manipulating um teenagers from multiple different countries and seriously doing rituals in a cave of killing a snake to prove himself to this Korean sensei who is 90,000 fucking years old. There are so many aspects about Reed as a character that are just so fundamentally broken. He is such a broken man. He has become so evil and so broken to the point where he doesn't even know what he's really doing anymore. And this is evidenced by the frequent moral flip-flops he has. The fact that he feels like he unleashed a monster in Silver by reactivating Silver's inherently extremely evil nature. Um, to the point where he feels like he reawakens and he realizes his sins toward Donnie, and then just the absolutely brilliant way that he goes out. Um, I love Kreese because I struggle to think of a character even beyond villains even who is just such a broken man that he doesn't even know what he's really doing, and that's what influences him to be a villain like he is. Making good progress to the list. Um, Number 12 is Gus Fring from Breaking Bad and also Better Call Saul. Although uh he isn't really um he isn't really a villain in Better Call Saul. Uh Much more so in Breaking Bad. Um and what makes Gus an awesome guy is that he is just the best kind of cool evil. Like he has he has his uh grudges, so to speak, with certain members of the cartel that he gets revenge on. And it's super satisfying to see him do so. But um in a way, I think that Gus is this fantastic sort of foreshadow for Walter's eventual downfall by the end of the show, because Gus's bad habits, like trying to get revenge on everybody, um having a stable operation which ultimately ends up being destroyed by his own ego, partly anyway. Um, and also, like, the way that he ends up going out by essentially losing everything despite trying to be on top of everyone else. All of those aspects are like this incredible foreshadow for Walter's journey, because Walt essentially goes through every single step that Gus went through, which led to his downfall. And that's what makes him a brilliant villain to me. Number 11 is Grand Admiral Thrawn. Um, Thrawn has moved down quite a few spots from my previous list. Um, but that's only because I feel like I have just been consuming a greater and greater caliber of villains recently. Um, but that being said, I do still think Thrawn is an incredible villain, and he is still one of my favorite Star Wars characters. Um, what I love about Thrawn is the way that he is just this ruthless, cold, calculating admiral who, like, fucking studies the culture of his enemies in order to understand them. And, like, everything about him is so chilling and mysterious, and that's what makes him just this fantastic screen presence, is the way that he is just this natural opposition to literally everything that is going on with the rebels. Um, and I just find that so freaking compelling. Um, and number 10 is Emperor Palpatine. I think that with the exception of one other character on this list, um, Palpatine is the greatest example of a pure evil villain in all of fiction. Because there is literally nothing redeemable about him. Like, there is no nuance to his motivations. Similar to Luis, there is just like absolutely blatantly zero subtlety at all to anything that he does as a villain, unless it's something that he does when manipulating Anakin. Like the way that he masterfully orchestrates everything and brings down the fall of the Republic and creates this empire, and like all of these incredible moments. Like he has so much build up in Empire Strikes Back to when he appears in Return of the Jedi. And he is so chilling and yet mysterious in a similar way to Thrawn. But Thrawn isn't nearly as evil, just straight up evil and manipulative as Palpatine is. And the way that he's able to get at Luke, for example, is just like masterful. And that's why he's just like, along with his apprentice, who's at number 9 spot, one of the most iconic villains in cinema. And speaking of iconic villains in cinema, as I just mentioned, number 9 is indeed Darth Vader. Um, Darth Vader is obviously probably even more iconic than Palpatine, realistically. Um, Everyone knows why Vader is a goaded villain. I don't really need to talk about it that much. Like, And honestly, there are so many little things about Vader that you could probably analyze that people on YouTube have probably done way better than me. Um, but the thing that ultimately, I guess, prevents me from ranking Vader higher is that I feel like comparatively to every other villain from 8 to 1, he just doesn't have as much material to make him as as nuanced or complex of a villain. Um and the only villain that, in my opinion, rivals Palpatine in terms of being the best pure evil villain in fiction is Aizen from Bleach. And I think the thing that makes me put Aizen over Palpatine just ever so slightly is the fact that, to me, Aizen has a lot of subtlety in the way that he is force portrayed and his ultimate betrayal and how that comes upon. Um and and like the combination of the way that he is so ridiculously pure evil and has all these crazy master plans, combined with the subtlety of his betrayal, is just enough to put him above Palpatine for the best pure evil villain to me. And number 7, and this is probably one I'll talk a fair bit about because this is a brand new addition on the list. Um, Morgana from the House in Fata Morgana. Now, Morgana is difficult to talk about. Because I feel like the aspects of Morgana that are focused on more are um her backstory and subsequent redemption um through the latter half, and also seeing her full dynamic and relationship with Jacopo, um and the extremely troubled relationship that both of them have. um and yet, why I have Morgana ranked this high is because I feel like the actual parts where she is a villain, like the main villain of the visual novel, are not talked about nearly enough, at least in comparison to her redemption um, and stuff with uh, fuck, what, it's not Rein part Innocence. Yes, Requiem of Innocence. That's the name of it. Compared to the stuff in Requiem of Innocence and just in general about their relationship, I feel like Morgana's aspects as a villain aren't nearly talked about enough because her dynamic with Mikkel in the mansion is just so it makes Morgana so hateable. Like truly so fucking hateable. Um and this is part of the reason why I don't personally rate Morgana as a character that highly, which makes it difficult to talk about her as a villain because of the other things that I mentioned. But um I feel like I respect her being such a hateable and such a well executed villain in comparison to the stuff about her redemption. Um, and yet the stuff about her redemption is undoubtedly what makes her a fantastic villain because well, specifically her backstory is just insanely fucked up. Like, there's no other way to describe it. I don't even want to go into details beyond just saying it is insanely fucked up. Um, and that to me was the thing that made Morgana most compelling, not only as a character but also as a villain, is the fact that there was that material within the base game that made her compelling enough as a villain, and her redemption was believable enough as a character within the main game itself, that I didn't really feel like innocence was exactly a necessary thing at a lot of the time. Um, I still really enjoyed innocence as a part of uh the film's story, but compared to the base game, in my opinion, it is incomparable to me, because the base game is just infinitely better in every aspect. And one of the biggest ways that I think this is done is the fact that I think that Morgana as a villain is a better character in the base game alone. Um, that was very roundabout. I hope I sort of got my um thoughts across. Like, I love Morgana because of the way that he is just this completely fucked up character who has a fucked up backstory, and brings out all her fucked upness to every aspect of the mansion and the story and every element of it. And I really don't think that any other villain does a better job of that than Morgana, or at least very few do, in terms of just like that way of bringing everything that is up about them and just making it apply to everything else as part of a story. Um, uh, Now that I think about it, one of those villains that actually does do that, although I would say to a lesser extent than Morgana, is the number 6 spot, Griffith. Um, Now, Griffith is one of my favorite characters in fiction, because he is this character that seems like too much for the story of Berserk. I have talked about this ad nauseum in multiple different videos and multiple different top tens featuring Griffith, and me talking about the story of Berserk. Um, and it is these similar aspects and the way that they influence his downfall, which makes him an incredible villain. The only reason why Griffith is realistically not ranked higher on this list is because of the fact that I feel like um the what is more compelling about him is his overall character, and not as much his villainous aspects, but his villainous aspects are still so good that they are like enough to rank this high on my personal list. Um, and I would say that the rest of the villains on this list, in fact, sort of um a sort of lock for a sort of prerequisite for all of the villains in my top five, in a similar way to Griffith, but just done better from a pure villainous perspective, not exactly as an overall character, and less so on the villain part. Every villain in my top five is a villain slash character that is so good because of the way that they seem to envelop the entire story of the piece of fiction that they take place in. And undoubtedly one of the strongest examples of that, in my opinion, is the number 5 spot, Valkyria from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Um, Now, the Emperor as a character makes brief appearances in like the he plays a pretty darn big role in the Jedi Knight one, considering you fight him at the end and all that. But um uh but he also plays a minor role in the Sith Warrior one. But, like the main meat of where he comes from is in Knights of the Fallen Empire and Knights of the Eternal Throne, because he is in the beginning before he is apparently killed by Arkan, I mean. Um Arkan, I mean. Oh yeah, I can't pronounce the names. Um But then something so interesting happens where he like envelops the spirit of the main character that you're playing as, and he becomes a direct part of the story itself, because there are a lot of significant choices that you make on whether or not to make use of Valkorian's power, um and how that affects the outcome of your character in this story. And it goes further beyond that to where, um, like at a certain point, which is, uh, well, in my opinion, chapter 2 of Knights of the Fallen Empire is one of the greatest sections of a piece of fiction of all time, because that entire sequence of like where Valkorian makes you confront all these things in your dreams is just, the only way I can put it is one of my favorite sections of a piece of media of all time. But there's also this brilliant moment in, I'm pretty sure it's chapter 12 of Knights of the Fallen Empire, which is seemingly like something completely different from any other part of that section of the story, because it seems like it takes a complete halt on preparing to fight Arkin, and then it features this whole thing where you're exploring, um I forget the name of the planet that you what is the name of the planet where Knights of the Fallen Empire takes place? Odessin, that's it, Odessin. I think it's Odessin. That name sounds familiar to me now. I think it is Odessin. But it seems like this completely random departure where you're exploring these parts of Odessa that you never explore again in any other part of the story. And like Satele Shan and Darth Marr, their alliance plays a big role in this. But so does Valkorian, because he seemingly abandons you at this point because he doesn't believe that you're a willing vessel. And I think that this happens regardless of the choices that you make or not, really. Um, Although the exact dialogue might change it around. I don't know. It's been a long time since I played this part of Quoter, but um, huh, um, but like this scene where he seems to be sort of testing you, and then he like disappears from the story and then reappears again in Knights of the Eternal Throne, and like reveals his true intentions by manipulating his daughter, who I'm blanking on the name of right now. um like that whole process is just incredible. um and like even compared to every other villain in this the remaining four on this list, I really don't believe that any other villain in fiction embodies and encompasses the entirety of the story in the same way or as well as Valkorion does to me. So that's why he is one of my favorite villains in all of fiction. Uh, and by far my favorite video game villain. Um, so I think I forgot to mention that up to that point. And number four is Johann from Monster. Now I really don't know what I could say about Johann that would be new material, because not only have I talked about Johann several times on this channel, and like why he's one of my favorite villains of all time, and uh, by a fair margin, my favorite anime villain for that matter. Um, in my opinion, like Johann is so freaking good. Um, well, also like he's been talked about to death by so many people on YouTube that have probably done a better job than on it than me, similar to Darth Vader. Um, I guess that since I talked about this criteria for Johann and the top five, and talked about it a lot with Valkorian, I don't know if I've talked about this aspect of Johann's villainy before, but I'm going to talk about how Johann sort of encompasses the entirety of the story. Um, because in a similar way to Sephiroth, but like on a much grander scale, his actions are what make up the entirety of the story of Monster. And like every single one of Tenma's actions is guided based on a principle that like he thinks that Johann is doing. And the way that Johann encompasses the entire story and subsequently influences every decision that Tenma makes is what makes their dynamic just fantastic. Um, and yeah, that's why Johann is a brilliantly written villain. Um, I don't know if that was an original aspect to the way I've talked about Johann. It probably wasn't, but it's the simplest way to talk about why Johann is a brilliant villain. Um, and number three, and a character that I think does this to an even better degree, even if it is extremely close between Johann and Friend, who is number three. I think that Friend does it just a little bit better. Um, and this is something that, especially after finishing 20th Century Boys last year, this is something I have gone back and forth on a lot as to like number one, which of them do I prefer straight up, but also why do I think that Friend is better? Because for a long time it was hard for me to articulate into words. Um, And the reason why I believe that Friend is ever so slightly a better villain than Johann, and slightly better at this aspect of enveloping the entirety of the story that they take place in, is that I feel like Friend, across his presence in the story, accomplishes more and is able to change the very nature of the story itself more. Like the ways that he just completely is able to fundamentally shift society is honestly just insane. And like, as much as Johann influences the actions of Tenma, like, to me, Friend is better than Johann because of the matter of scale and the fact that Friend was able to do things, in my opinion, on a scale that Johann was just not able to reach within the story of Monster. Um, Now this was the biggest change to the list by far. Because on my last list, Friend was number two, which obviously means that a character displaced Thanos in number one, and that means that Thanos is number two spot. Um, I will talk about who is number one in a second, although I have mentioned it in a previous video. Uh, maybe even more than one actually, but I think only just one. So there's a chance that you might know who it is if you're a frequent watcher of videos on this channel, or if you remember that at all for some reason. Uh, and that's Thanos. Or I guess number two is Thanos. He's not number one. Yeah, I was talking about who is number one that replaced him. Uh, but we gotta talk about Thanos first because he is still my second favorite villain in fiction and still in my top 10 characters in fiction. Um, and for me, what makes what makes Thanos the former best villain of all time is the way that, if Friend's philosophy and goals manipulated an entire world, then Thanos did so on a completely different scale, um, in terms of an entire fucking universe was affected by his philosophies and the way that that envelops the story. And um and just like the sheer way that he seems to transform the story of Infinity War and Endgame and just plows through heroes one after another, like this completely fundamentally changes the scale and nature of MCU storytelling up to that point. Just makes him like um just makes him one just makes him the second greatest villain in fiction, I mean, like formerly number one spot. And it was that aspect of scale that I really used to say was the thing that really made me have him at number one. But he's not at number one. And I will explain why to the best of my ability. So number one, I've stalled around it for long enough. The villain that was incredible enough to displace Thanos from the number one spot and break the um like almost 8-year streak because Thanos was number one ever since I uh first watched Infinity War back in seventh grade in 2018, all the way until I finished Hannibal earlier this year. Um, and Hannibal takes place number one, ending Thanos's 8-year streak. So now we will see if Hannibal outlasts that streak. Um, So, in terms of the way that like Hannibal really envelops the story, it is because he is at the center of everything. He is at he is like at the center of basically every single uh serial killing that's done because of the way that he influences so many of them. Um his fundamental relationship with both Jack and Will as like this main trio of like the god, the devil, and the lamb, with Hannibal being the devil, um, and the way that that fundamentally impacts every aspect of Hannibal as as a TV show and a story. Um, Hannibal as a character is just so like he literally is present in every element. And despite the fact that like Friend and Thanos like affect the story on a bigger scale, neither one of them pervade and affect the story to the ridiculous amount of detail, and nor are they as important to their own respective stories as Hannibal is to Hannibal as a TV show. I mean, it's literally named after him, for fuck's sake. Um, so that's one reason why he's better than Thanos for me. But that's not the only reason. In fact, the chief other reason, and honestly the primary reason why I have Hannibal above Thanos at my favorite villain in all of fiction is the dynamic with Will Graham. Because even more than Hannibal pervading every aspect of the show is the dynamic between the two of them. And the incredibly complicated and messy and captivating and yet horrible relationship between the two of them is just the best dynamic in fiction, and it is not even close. Which is a little bit of a spoiler for whenever I update my dynamics list, but like it really shouldn't be that surprising based on how I talked about it in my Hannibal video. Um, like that entire dynamic and just how that is the best dynamic in fiction is really the main reason, combined with the ways that he so closely pervades and is involved with every aspect of Hannibal as a story, um, is why he is better than Thanos to me and my favorite villain in all fiction. As predicted, this was a pretty long video, 53 minutes and counting, according to my recording. Um, and according to my recording, that's a funny rhyme. Anyway, this was a quite long video, but I love talking about villains. Villains are one of my favorite elements of a story, realistically, and honestly, villains I would say are my favorite aspect of characters within a story even more than protagonists. Um, because I personally believe that it is more interesting to see how a villain can affect the entirety of a story and a protagonist as a result, compared to seeing a protagonist's journey through a story in the first place. And that's why I ultimately love villains as my favorite types of characters, and that's why I love talking about them and why I have done so for 54 minutes. Um, Hopefully you enjoyed this very long video. Let me know what you think of my list and who your favorite villains of all time are in the comments below. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.